Okay, so like I said before, we're going to be getting into the concept of graphing our intercepts, how to identify what your x and y intercepts are, and then how to graph them. So as a key reminder, one more time, our slope-intercept form is just that y is equal to mx plus b, where m is going to represent your slope in your equation, and then that plus b or minus b, plus or minus, is going to represent the y-intercept for your equation. Okay, so that is the main format that we tend to put our equations into. And so what you should have been practicing on your IXLs earlier was that idea of rewriting them into your slope-intercept form. So we'll go ahead and just do one example again together. When we are rewriting into slope-intercept form, we need to make sure that we isolate the y. So that means we have to get rid of everything else over to the other side. So always when we're talking about our isolation, the first thing that we're going to do is move our x term over to the other side. To move it, we're going to use addition or subtraction. I know a lot of times you guys look at it and go, well, wait, whenever there's a coefficient, we're supposed to divide. But we're not trying to get x by itself. We're trying to actually move x. So whenever you're moving an entire term, you use addition and subtraction. When you're simplifying a term, you use multiplication or division. Okay, so to move a term from one side to the other, we're going to have to add or subtract. In this case, because the 8 is a positive, we're going to subtract the 8x from both sides. Now remember, we cannot do 40 minus 8x because 40 is just a constant, whereas the minus 8x is a variable term with a coefficient involved. So we're left with a positive 4y is now equal to, I'm going to write that negative 8x in the front, because my slope-intercept form has my slope term first, and then I'm going to put that plus 40 right behind it because the 40 was a positive. Now we're going to go ahead and focus on isolating the y by simplifying it to a value of 1, a coefficient of 1. And the only way that we can do that is to go ahead and divide by 4. But remember, when you divide everything. Every term gets divided by 4. Every single term is going to get divided by the 4. Oops, I don't know why I put a negative there. So every term is going to get divided by the 4. Your y is now isolated. That negative 8x divided by 4 is going to come out to a negative 2x, where the negative 2 represents our slope. And then the positive 40 divided by 4 comes out to a positive 10, and that positive 10 is going to represent that y-intercept. Okay, so once we have our slope-intercept form written, we can go ahead and graph it. Remember, we always start by graphing the y-intercept first. So when we graph the y-intercept, we're graphing it at the point 0, 10. The y-intercept is when your x value is 0, and you're crossing the y-axis at the point 10. Okay, so there's my y-intercept. And then from there, I use my slope like a direction. My slope is going to be a GPS. It's going to navigate me from this point to my next one. So since my slope was a negative 2, I can write it as a negative 2 over 1, which means I'm going to go down 2 points, but then I'm going to go to the right 1 point. Or I could write it as a positive 2 over a negative 1, which means I would go up 2 positions, but then I would move to the left 1 position. Okay, you always want to make sure that you do multiple points in both directions when graphing. So we'll first follow down 2 to the right 1, and then down 2 to the right 1, down 2 to the right 1. And you could do this as often as you want, as many points as you need. then you're going to do the opposite. You're going to go up 2 to the left 1, up 2 to the left 1. Okay? After that, you then have the ability to connect them and create your line. Remember, when we connect it, we always want to use a straight edge. You don't want to try to freehand it. But there's our graph. Okay? Any questions about how to rewrite and then graph our slope-intercept form? Okay. I'll go ahead and take the AirPod out. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next page. All right, so the x-intercept, talking about the x-intercept is just going to be the point or the x-coordinate on the point where you are going to cross the x-axis. Just like your y-intercept is where you cross the y-axis on a graph, your x-intercept is where you cross the x-axis. And this is the position in which y is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and get that written down. The x-coordinate, that's what it's going to be. It's your x-coordinate of the point where the graph crosses the x-axis. And again, this is the positioning when y is equal to 0. Just like your y-intercept is when x is equal to 0, your x-intercept is when y is going to be equal to 0. So if we were to just look at a simple grid and I had a line graphed through it, our y-intercept is, again, where the point or the line crossed the y-axis. That was our y-intercept. And again, that's when x was equal to 0. And then where your line crosses the x-axis, that was your x-intercept. So when y was equal to 0. Okay, so sometimes the equations that are given to you are going to be in your slope-intercept form. And all you have to do is first state what are the intercepts, and then you can just graph the intercepts. If you know what your intercepts are, you can graph those 2 points and then connect them, and that creates your line for you. So the first thing that we want to do in this situation is we're going to state the intercepts. Now, it's really easy in this form to be able to state your y-intercept because remember, it's in slope-intercept form. Your y-intercept is already listed right here. Your y-intercept in this case is at 0, -2. Now, when you're wanting to identify your x-intercept, that's when you're going to have to change the y value to what? To 0. If we want the x-intercept, we're going to plug in 0 for your y value. Okay, so if I have my equation was y was equal to 2/3 x minus 2. I'm going to replace my y with the value 0. And then I'm just going to solve my equation. So I have 0 is equal to 2/3 x minus 2. The first thing that I need to do in order to be able to solve this is add 2 to both sides. I'm going to add 2 to both sides so that way I can go ahead and get rid of this minus 2. Okay, that then gives me an equation that says 2 is equal to 2/3 x. 2/3 is just a coefficient. In order to get rid of a coefficient, you divide. So I'm going to divide by 2/3 here, and those will simplify out. I can cross them off. And then I'm going to take 2 and divide it by 2/3. Okay, when I do 2 divided by 2/3, guys, that's the exact same thing as saying 2 times 3/2. Remember, we don't actually divide by fractions, we multiply by the fraction's reciprocal. So that's the exact same thing as saying 2 times 3/2. And that's just going to come out to 3. She's splitting them up into their families. So I'm sure that they are, yeah, I'm sure they're having a field day over there. So your x-intercept in this case is going to be 3, 0. It's at the point 3, 0. So you now know what your y-intercept is. Your y-intercept is at 0, -2. You know what your x-intercept is. It's at 3, 0. And you can just graph those 2 points. So if we graph it at 3, 0, it's going to be located right here. And then 0, -2 is located right there. And now I can go ahead and connect them. I only need to have those 2 points connect or graphed to connect. And there's my line. That's it. Okay, what I want you guys to do is I want you to turn it over to the next page, and you're going to try example 2 on your own. All right, let's go ahead and take a look here at example number 2. So example number 2, very, very simple. Again, starting off with the y-intercept. There's our y-intercept. It's at 0, +5. That's our y-intercept. Now for our x-intercept, we have to set it up and solve. So we are just going to replace the y with what value again, guys? A 0. We're going to replace the y with a 0, and then we can start to solve it. So 0 is equal to -1/2 x plus the 5. First thing that we're going to do, subtract the 5. We're going to subtract 5 from both sides. That's going to go ahead and get rid of the 5's. You'll now have -5 is equal to -1/2 x. And then your last step is to divide both sides by a -1/2. Okay, but remember, dividing by a fraction is the same thing as taking -5 and multiplying it by the reciprocal, which would be -2/1, or just -2. Okay, once you've done that, you then have x by itself. So you'd get x is supposed to be equal to a +10. That means your x-intercept is going to be graphed at 10, 0. Your x-intercept gets graphed at 10, 0. So our x-intercept is located here at 10, 0. Our y-intercept is located up at 0, 5. And then we connect them to form our graph. And again, things that you can do to make sure that you've done it correctly. First thing you can note is that it's a negative slope, which makes sense because the slope was a -1/2. Okay, so since the slope was a -1/2, that means that your graph should go in a negative direction for your slope. Okay? All right, now if you look down here at the bottom, it says standard form at the bottom of this page. The standard form, as a reminder, is that format of a times x plus b times y is equal to c, where a, b, and c are all real numbers. They're all considered to be real numbers. The x and the y are considered to be your variables in your graph. Okay? So this is your standard form. You've already seen our slope-intercept form. Here's our standard form. Now the nice thing about standard form, so let's go ahead and go to the next page. The nice thing about the standard form, if you flip it over to the back, is it's super, super easy to be able to solve for your intercepts. You do not have to rewrite it in order to be able to solve for your intercepts. You can solve for it naturally. So let's start with the x-intercept. My equation was 4x minus 3y is equal to 24. And with my x-intercept, I know that my y value has to be equal to 0. When I'm solving for my x-intercept, my y value has to be equal to 0. But here's the nice thing. If I plug 0 in for my y, it's essentially like saying, hey, this y term never even existed. I can cross it on off. It never existed at all, so I'm really just left with the equation 4x is equal to 24. That's a simple one to solve, isn't it? What do I do, Alex? You divide by 4. All we have to do in this case is divide both sides by 4. We get x is equal to 6, so my intercept is 6, 0. Same thing for your y-intercept. Just as simple. With the y-intercept, that's when x is equal to 0. So we have 4x minus 3y is equal to 24. If I plug 0 in for x, it's like I'm taking that x term and it no longer exists. I'm just crossing it off. And so what I'm really left with is the equation negative 3y is equal to 24. To solve for that, you would just divide both sides by negative 3. And you get y is equal to negative 8. So you have 0, negative 8. You do not have to take standard form and rewrite it into slope-intercept form just to be able to solve. You can solve for your intercepts very easily when it's in standard form. Solving for your x, you just remove the y. When you're solving for the y, you just remove the x. That's it. Okay, and then you can graph them, just like before. Our y-intercept is at negative 8, right? 0, negative 8. So it's down here at the bottom. Our x-intercept is at 6, 0. And then we connect. Okay. So with that in mind, I think you guys can go ahead and do examples 4, 5, and 6 on your own. Try examples 4, 5, and 6 on your own. Okay, again, for example number 4, when you solved for x-intercept, it was negative 2, 0. When you solved for your y-intercept, it was 0, negative 5. There's your graph. Everybody okay? Yes. Fantastic. Example number 5. When you solve for your x-intercept, you should have gotten positive 2, 0. When you solve for your y-intercept, you should have gotten 0, positive 4. And then here's what your graph should look like. Make sure you double check it. Make sure everything is okay. Everybody good? Yes? No? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on then. Example number 6. For example number 6, when you solved it, you should have gotten that your x-intercept is at negative 6, 0. Your y-intercept should be at a 0, 9. So negative 6, 0, and then 0, 9 for your y-intercept. This is what your graph should look like. On Google Classroom, if you go to Google Classroom, there is a quizzes that is open for you. You get one shot, one opportunity only. It is a login using your Google Classroom login. So your student Google login. You get one opportunity to take it. It is 25 questions. Remember, if you don't finish it before class time is over, you need to hit save and exit before you exit out. If you do not save and exit, I can't guarantee that it'll let you back in. So make sure you do it. It is due before class time tomorrow. It closes when class starts tomorrow. So make sure you get it done.